Please don't make the same mistake I almost made after getting too comfortable around my stepbrother. It was a situation I never thought I'd find myself in, but there I was, standing in the bathroom, feeling things I never thought I would. Attraction is strange, isn't it? You think you've got it all under control until, out of nowhere, it sneaks up on you. I never thought I'd feel anything other than family connection with my stepbrother. After all, we had been living in the same house for years, and everything had always been normal between us. We'd laugh, joke, and argue like any siblings do, but that all changed one evening, and it completely caught me off guard. It was a weekend like any other. My dad and his wife had gone out for the evening, leaving me and my stepbrother home alone. He was a couple of years older than me, and we'd always gotten along pretty well. In fact, most people thought it was cool how close we were as step-siblings. There was never anything more to it than that. Just a typical family dynamic, or so I thought. The evening started off like any other. We were both in the living room watching TV, talking about random things, and everything felt normal. At least until it didn't. Somewhere during our conversation, I started noticing small things. The way he'd smile at me, the way he'd laugh at my jokes, or how he'd glance at me a little longer than usual. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I was just overthinking it. But as the night went on, those little things started piling up, and I couldn't help but feel weird about it. I remember getting up at one point to go to the bathroom, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. I thought some space would clear my head, so I stood at the bathroom sink, splashing water on my face, wondering why I suddenly felt so self-conscious. It was just my stepbrother. What was I even thinking? But then, as I stood there, I heard a soft knock on the door. My stepbrother poked his head in, asking if I was okay. There was nothing unusual about that. He was just checking in on me, right? But for some reason, the way he stood in the doorway made me feel uneasy, like something was shifting between us, even though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. We ended up talking for a bit, right there at the bathroom door. Nothing about our conversation was out of the ordinary, but there was this strange undercurrent that I couldn't shake. It felt like there was something unspoken hanging in the air between us. I knew I shouldn't have felt that way, but I did. It was like all of a sudden I was hyper aware of every little thing. The way he looked at me, the way he leaned against the doorframe like he was in no hurry to leave. I could feel my heart beating faster, and I couldn't understand why. It wasn't like he was doing anything inappropriate. We were just talking. But the feeling of tension was growing, and I felt trapped between what I knew was right and this strange pull I couldn't explain. I kept thinking, this is ridiculous. He's my stepbrother. Why am I feeling like this? But no matter how much I tried to shake it off, the feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't long before the conversation took a more personal turn, and that's when I really started to panic inside. He wasn't saying anything wrong, nothing out of line, but the way I was interpreting everything felt wrong. Like, why was I suddenly feeling like this was something more than just an innocent conversation? I started overthinking every word, every glance, and every second that ticked by, and I couldn't help but feel like I was standing on the edge of a line I shouldn't cross. I stood there gripping the bathroom sink, trying to focus on anything other than the weird tension that had built up between us. He kept talking, still standing in the doorway, and I kept nodding along, pretending like everything was normal. But inside, I was fighting a battle with myself. I didn't want to acknowledge what I was feeling because the whole situation was messing with my head. It didn't make any sense. Why was I feeling so drawn to him when just days ago, we were nothing more than close step-siblings? The conversation dragged on, but my mind was elsewhere. I was too busy trying to figure out how I could possibly be feeling this way. Was it just because we were alone? Was it the quietness of the house, or maybe just my own thoughts playing tricks on me? I didn't know, but whatever it was, I knew it wasn't right. It wasn't something I should be feeling toward him, and I needed to put a stop to it. At one point, he stepped a little closer, and my heart skipped a beat. My mind was racing with all kinds of thoughts, none of them making any sense. I didn't want to make it obvious, but I was getting uncomfortable. Not because he was doing anything wrong, but because I didn't trust myself in that moment. I felt this overwhelming urge to pull away, to create some distance between us before I ended up doing or saying something I'd regret. I told him I needed to finish getting ready for bed, hoping he'd take the hint and leave the bathroom. He hesitated for a moment, still leaning in the doorway, but then finally nodded and said goodnight before closing the door behind him. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were gripping the edge of the sink so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. What just happened? As soon as he was gone, I felt this wave of relief, but also confusion. I stood there staring at my reflection in the mirror, trying to make sense of what I had just felt. It was a strange mix of emotions, attraction, guilt, confusion, all jumbled together in a way that made me feel uneasy. I kept thinking, why did I feel like that? Why did he act like that? I couldn't wrap my head around it. Part of me was tempted to just brush it off and go to bed, but another part of me knew that I needed to get a handle on what was going on inside my head. I didn't want to let these feelings fester, to let this weird attraction grow into something that could ruin everything between us. We were step-siblings, and we had always been close, but it needed to stay that way. Nothing more, nothing less. I spent the next hour tossing and turning in bed, unable to shake the thoughts swirling in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, replayed the conversation in my head, and wondered if he had felt the same thing I did. It was driving me crazy, the way this whole situation was playing out. I didn't know if it was just me overthinking things or if there was something more going on between us, something that neither of us wanted to admit. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep, hoping that by the morning everything would feel normal again. Maybe it was just a fluke, just a weird moment that I could chalk up to tiredness or the strange energy of the night. I told myself that it would all make sense in the daylight, that it was nothing more than an awkward encounter between siblings who had spent too much time together that evening. But when I woke up the next morning, things still felt off. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way he had looked at me, the way I had felt standing there in the bathroom, and the nagging feeling that something had shifted between us. I didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it was, but I couldn't deny that there was something there, something I needed to get control over before it spiraled into something neither of us could handle. The next morning, I woke up with that same uneasy feeling gnawing at me. I wanted to pretend everything was fine, that the previous night had just been a weird blip, but deep down I knew better. I couldn't shake the tension even though I really wanted to. I tried to act normal during breakfast. We sat across from each other at the table, and everything seemed fine on the surface. We were chatting, making small talk, but there was this weird undercurrent that wasn't there before. I could feel myself being overly aware of every little thing he did, the way he talked, the way he moved. It all felt too intense, like there was some sort of unspoken weight between us. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But it wasn't just me, I could tell. He seemed different too, not drastically, but enough for me to notice. I caught him glancing at me a few times, quickly looking away when our eyes met. It felt like we were both tiptoeing around something we didn't want to acknowledge, but it was there, hanging between us like a thick fog. After breakfast, I decided I needed some space. I couldn't stay in the house with him all day, not with this tension building inside me. I made up an excuse to get out for a while, telling him I was going to run some errands. He didn't ask too many questions, which was a relief. I needed to clear my head, to put some distance between us before things got any more complicated. As I walked through the neighborhood, I kept replaying everything in my mind. The way I'd felt in the bathroom, the way he'd looked at me, it all felt so confusing, as I hated that I was even thinking this way. He was my stepbrother, and this wasn't supposed to happen. I should have been able to laugh it off as a silly, awkward moment, but I couldn't. The attraction I had felt was real, and it was messing with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I knew I needed to get a handle on it before I made things worse. The more I walked, the more I realized that I needed to face it head on. Avoiding him or pretending nothing happened wasn't going to solve anything. I needed to find a way to deal with these feelings before they spiraled out of control. I wasn't about to let a fleeting attraction ruin the relationship we'd built as step-siblings. We were family now, and I had to respect that, no matter how complicated my emotions were. When I got back to the house later that day, I felt a little more grounded, but I knew the tension was still there. I needed to figure out how to handle it without making things awkward between us. I wasn't sure how he was feeling, but I couldn't be the one to make it weird. I decided to keep things light, to act as if nothing had changed, even though inside I was still wrestling with all these confusing emotions. That evening, we were both hanging out in the living room again. It felt a little like déjà vu, the same setting, the same casual conversation, but this time I was determined not to let my mind wander. I focused on keeping things normal, just like they had always been. We laughed, talked about our plans for the next week, and for a while it felt like maybe things could go back to the way they were. But then, out of nowhere, he brought up the night before. "Hey, about last night," he started, his tone casual, but I could hear the underlying tension. My stomach flipped as I braced myself for what he was about to say. Was it just me, or was there something weird about that? I froze for a second, not sure how to respond. I had been hoping we wouldn't have to talk about it, that it would just fade into the background and we could move on. But now that he had brought it up, I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. I had to face it. "Yeah, I felt it too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I could feel my face flushing, but I kept my eyes on the TV, avoiding his gaze. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but at the same time, I couldn't lie. We both knew something had shifted between us, and there was no point in denying it. "I don't know what it was," he said, his tone a little more serious now. "But we can't let it get weird, right? I mean, we're family. We can't let something like that mess things up." I nodded, relieved that he felt the same way. "Yeah, you're right. It was just a weird moment. Let's not make it a thing." I tried to sound casual, like it wasn't a big deal, but inside I was still feeling the weight of everything. We had acknowledged it, and now hopefully we could move past it. But a part of me knew it wasn't going to be that easy. After that conversation, things were a little easier. We had acknowledged the tension, and it seemed like we were both committed to not letting it get in the way. For the next few days, everything went back to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. We talked, we hung out, and things felt less awkward. But even though we were trying to move past it, I couldn't completely ignore the feelings that had surfaced. They were still there, lingering in the background, even though I was doing my best to push them down. I spent a lot of time thinking about why I had felt the way I did. Was it just because we were step-siblings, not blood-related? Or was it something deeper, something about the closeness we had always shared that had crossed a line in my mind? Whatever it was, I knew I couldn't let it go any further. I had to keep reminding myself that this wasn't just about me. It was about our family, about keeping things normal and not letting these emotions ruin what we had built together as a blended family. One afternoon I was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, when he walked in. We hadn't talked about that night again, and I was fine with that. I didn't want to bring it up, and it seemed like he didn't either, but as he sat down at the table across from me, I felt that familiar tension start to creep back in. It was like no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't fully shake it. He started talking about something random, sports or a TV show, I can't even remember, and I was trying to focus on what he was saying. But my mind kept wandering back to the way I had felt that night in the bathroom. It was like this invisible wall had been built between us, one that neither of us could see but both of us could feel. Finally, after a few minutes of small talk, he paused and looked at me. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice soft, like he was testing the waters. "Is everything okay?" I nodded, trying to act like nothing was bothering me. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." "About what?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, watching me. I hesitated for a moment, not sure how much to say. I didn't want to make things awkward again, but I also didn't want to keep pretending like everything was perfectly fine. Just everything, I guess. You know, the stuff we talked about the other night. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it too. I mean, it was weird, right? But we're cool now, right? We're past it?" "Yeah," I said quickly, even though I wasn't entirely sure. "We're cool, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to explain." He didn't say anything for a minute, just sat there, looking at me like he was waiting for me to say more. I felt this pressure building inside me, like I needed to get everything off my chest, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to make things worse by talking about it again, but at the same time, I couldn't keep ignoring the elephant in the room. "I guess I don't want things to change between us," I finally said, my voice quiet. "We've always been close, and I don't want to lose that because of something stupid." He nodded again, his eyes softening. "I don't either, but we're not going to lose it. We'll be fine. We just have to be careful, you know. Not let stuff like that get in the way." I smiled a little, relieved that he understood. "Yeah, you're right. We'll be fine." We sat there for a few more minutes, talking about random things, and for the first time in days, I felt like maybe we really could move past this. Maybe the awkwardness would fade, and we could go back to being just step-siblings again, without all the confusing emotions getting in the way. Over the next few weeks, I worked hard to keep those feelings in check. Every time I felt that strange attraction creeping back in, I'd remind myself that this wasn't something I could act on. We were family now, and nothing could change that. It was tough, but I knew it was the right thing to do. Little by little, the tension started to fade and things between us began to feel more normal again. I realized that it wasn't about denying my emotions, but about managing them, about not letting them control my actions. In the end, I overcame those feelings by focusing on what really mattered: our family, our bond as step-siblings, and the fact that some lines just aren't meant to be crossed. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. And looking back, I'm glad I didn't let that moment of confusion define our relationship. We're still close, and that's something I'll always value.